All right, it's amazing what you can really remember from when you were small, but when our guide told us there at the Mammoth Cave about the young man who'd lost his life in the cave, Floyd Collins, when he was exploring it, I had to ask him what the year was. He said 1925, because I knew that I remembered, we lived in St. Louis, and I knew where I lived at the time. We had two young men staying with us, boarders. They probably bought this special record that was written about the incident, but at the time I remembered the big topic of conversation with everyone was that it went on for several days, was this someone who was trapped in the cave. He crawled in somewhere and it had caved in behind him, and they first tried to reach him, but they couldn't, so they knew that he lost his life there. So I asked, it was 1925, and I was 5 years old, but I remembered it. Also, there was a song about it that the young men probably bought a record and played it, because I must have heard it over and over again, but it went like this. Come all you young people and listen while I tell the fate of Floyd Collins, a lad you all know well. His face was fair and handsome, his life was strong and brave. His body now lies sleeping in a lonely sandstone cave. I also remember when Lindbergh made his flight across the Atlantic. When he returned, he eventually came to St. Louis. After all, his flight was financed by men from St. Louis, but I think it was on Art Hill in the park where there was a big crowd out to meet him, and of course talks and probably a award given. None of our family was there, but it was again a big topic of conversation among the adults about this flyer who had first flown across the Atlantic all alone. That would have been 1927. Again, we lived in the same house and had these two young men staying with us who probably took a daily paper and kept the conversation going.
Who were your boarders?
Ferris and Bill Mahan. Ferris Mahan eventually moved, I think, out near Stillville. And Bill Mahan was still going to Tower Grove Church when I was first married, when Austin and I were married, and we attended Tower Grove Church for a couple of years before Austin went in the Navy.
And so what did they play the record on?
They probably played the record on the old Victrola that we had, even as I grew up, but Bob and Dad didn't have the record. They didn't have many records. I'm sure they didn't spend any money for things like that when they were saving money to move back to buy a farm and move back to the country.
What records did Grandma and Grandpa like to play on the Victrola?
What did they like to play? They seldom played anything. I played a few records, and one of them I think was Ave Maria.
Okay.
I don't know where they had acquired it, but that's the only one I thoroughly remembered. But they only had 4 or 5 records. It was the type of Victrola that you had to crank up, wind up, and let it play till the records began to play slow and run down.
I said, where did your two boarders stay in your apartment?
Where did they stay? Well, we had, I think they stayed in what was the living room, and we didn't use it anymore. We probably spent more time in the kitchen than anywhere else and sat around the table and talked. It was a tiny apartment, but people lived crowded in those days. Apparently there was a shortage of housing everywhere because it wasn't unusual for people to have boarders and be crowded up for, you didn't have extra bedrooms. But I think it was the front room that probably, and they may have slept on the couch, a divan that was folded out for sleeping. It's the only thing I remember being in there that I do remember it was their room, but at least they stayed there, and Mom was a good cook. I don't know how they came to stay with Mom and Dad. They worked at a wood heel factory, a factory that made wooden high heels that were then covered with, looked like leather or something, for women's shoes.
Oh, okay.
But they ground out and made the wooden heels.